Welcome everyone to a meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm David Moeller, Secretary Jamie Tesler here. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation, if any. Please do not unmute or mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Regine Foley via the chat box or at rfoley@ctps.org, or call her at 857-702-3704. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Regine Foley, the MPO staff at rfoley@ctps.org, or call her at 857-702-3704. First item on the agenda is introductions. I'm David Muller from Secretary Jamie Tesler here. Jonathan, please call the roll.
Thank you. MassDOT seat 2.
John Bouchard, representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver, present.
Thank you. Mass DOT Highway Division. Okay, MBTA.
Charlie Schlingenstein, representing General Manager Steve Potvin.
Thank you. Massport.
Sarah Lee, representing Massport.
MAPC. Okay, MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Amira Patterson, representing the MBTA Advisory Board.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Diggins here.
Thank you. City of Boston BTD.
O'Conroy here.
Thank you. City of Boston BPDA.
Jim Fitzgerald, BPDA, representing Mayor Wu and City of Boston.
Thank you. At-large City of Everett.
Jay Monty, representing Mayor DiMaria and the City of Everett.
Thank you. At-large City of Newton.
David Kozas, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller and the City of Newton.
Thank you. At-large Town of Arlington. At-large Town of Brookline.
Heather Hamilton for the Town of Brookline.
Thank you. Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Katiana Ballantyne in the Inner Core.
Thank you. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton. Okay. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham. Okay. North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen, representing the North Shore Task Force, and Mayor Michael Kay.
Thank you. North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
Melissa Tintopoulos, representing Burlington and NSPC.
Thank you. South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland.
It looks like Jennifer is just joining, so maybe circle back.
Okay, I'll circle back. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway. Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Okay, I'll do our ex officio members and then I'll go back. Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, everyone. Ken Miller, Federal Highway.
Thank you. Federal Transit Administration. Okay, I'm going to circle back. MAPC, I believe Allison is here.
Yes, Allison Felix. I'm attending for Eric Barassa. He's not in the office today on MAPC's behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jennifer Constable. I'm sorry, South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland.
Good morning, Jen Constable, Rockland for the South Shore Coalition.
Okay. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I don't have one this week. So next we'll go to Executive Director's report. Megan?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and welcome everyone. I have a slightly longer Executive Director report today with some updates that I hope you will find interesting, but also will end with a brief discussion topic. So bear with me and we'll get to that topic towards the end. First of all, we have some staff updates and I am able to introduce you to additional new staff and you've been hearing about their recruitment. So let me start with Sean Rourke, who's joining us for the first time today. And he is managing our newly kind of organized or put together team of communications and outreach, which just for everyone's reminder includes Rasheen Foley, our communications associate, and also Stella Jordan, who is our newer public outreach coordinator. So Sean, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and saying hello to the group so they can see your face, that would be great.
Hi, really happy to be here and I'm excited to be joining the MPO staff to contribute to and help expand our outreach and communications efforts.
Thanks, Sean. I'm sure many of you will be talking with Sean much more. And in addition, the next person I'll announce, I know you'll interact with much more as well. Her name is Srileka Murthy, and she has joined us as our new UPWP manager. So she will be working with Sandy Johnston to take over UPWP responsibilities over this UPWP season. Srileka, could you please say hello to the team so that they can see you?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Srileka Murthy here, and I'm so excited to be working with all of you at the MPO board on a great UPWP this year and for years to come.
Thank you. Thank you both, Srileka and Sean, for saying hello. I'd like to just say that we are continuing to recruit and we'll have hopefully more introductions to make at the following board meeting, but we do have 3 open positions still right now. One is a new manager position for our project work, which will close this week. Another is the TIP manager position. Again, we will have Matt Genova with us for some time longer, but we are also trying to recruit someone to overlap with his remaining time with us, which will be a really excellent opportunity for us. That position is closing in 1 week. And then we have a new GIS programmer and analyst position, which has been posted and closes in 2 weeks. So please send folks to our website for applying to these jobs if you think it's a good fit for them. I also have a few updates on some of my own work and kind of how that's following up on a commitment to both the board's goals, but also to our staff strategic planning process. Today actually begins my year-long tenure as a board member for the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. So that will be for the calendar year of 2022. I've mentioned this before, but I just want to make sure everyone knows that that tenure is starting. And it's a great opportunity to have some exposure to other MPOs to sort of increase our kind of conversation and knowledge around federal policy and support also the strategic planning activities that staff have set up by kind of improving that engagement and collaboration with other MPOs. So I'm very excited for that role. I also began this month a year-long training on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I really wanted to bring that to the board because I think this program is a really valuable program. It is called YWE Boston, and it has had a number of public sector leaders that have been alums of the program. The former Massachusetts Secretary of Transportation, Stephanie Pollock, for example, was one of them. And what it is a program that's really focused on equipping leadership level staff with the tools, the network, and the skills that they need to analyze the root causes of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues faced by our organizations. And it culminates with a project that we commit to carrying out that we hope will implement change within our agency. And so that's very well aligned with the fact we're about to launch an internal DEI committee on staff, and they will start their work in the latter half of this state fiscal year. And that's called for in the strategic plan. And I also wanted to highlight it because we will be coming back to you, the board, with a statement that that group works to develop for DEI for our agency. So we will be coming back to you all to talk to you more about how your staff are committing to this initiative. So that I wanted to give a few other outreach and public engagement highlights. First of all, we had 2 events for the transit working group since the last MPO meeting. One of them was a coffee chat about the human services transportation, and that was on January 11th. And then we also this week had a forum on microtransit partnership, microtransit in partnership with MAPC and the MBTA advisory board. And that was a really excellent conversation. The recordings for both of those are available on the playlist, the Transit Working Group playlist on our YouTube channel. And so I welcome anybody to both watch those. And also the upcoming quarterly meeting for the working group will be on February 10th. As always, please check out our webpage for the Transit Working Group and/or reach out to Sandy Johnston if you would like more information or to be on the mailing list. We also had a meeting this week with the Intercore Committee Transportation Group. That was yesterday, and at that meeting, we talked about the MPO's Blue Bikes work, as well as the Curb Management Guidebook. So thank you again to the MPO members who participate in that. It's a really wonderful collaboration opportunity for us. The next meeting for that group will be on February 9th at 9 a.m. And at that one, the MBTA will be presenting on the bus priority toolkit that they are working on for municipalities. And then we have also, please take a look at the survey that we have released to solicit study ideas for the UPWP in 2023. It's available in 7 languages. And I believe Rasheen will put the link in the chat if she hasn't already. And please do share that with your networks. My next topic is that there are a few updates on corridor selections for UPWP discrete studies. So these are 2 annually recurring discrete studies that you, the board, approve in the UPWP. Again, they occur every year, and the selection of these corridors is based on criteria focused on safety, congestion, multimodal significance, regional equity, and the potential for actually implementing the projects. So there are 2 of them. One is the $145,000 effort to have conceptual design developed for a priority corridor that's identified in the long-range transportation plan. So the selection, the location that we selected this year is Route 1 in Norwood for a number of different reasons. Some of those include that there are several transportation equity zones within this corridor or connected with this corridor. There are 5 locations on the segment that have HSIP eligible crash clusters, one of them being one of the top 200 crash clusters in Massachusetts. There are poor facilities for people biking, and there are gaps in the sidewalk network. And a nice partnership, MAPC has been working with the Neponset Valley Transportation Management Association, as well as some of the communities on the corridor for addressing job and transit access along that corridor. So that's one of them. The other one is $133,000 study to look at a sub-regional priority for a corridor. And that's something that we determined from our sub-regional outreach. So this year we selected a 1.6 mile stretch of Washington Street in Canton from Sherman Street to Route 27 in Sharon and Stoughton. Some of the reasons we selected that is because of its important economic development role, because it includes Canton downtown and the Cobb's Corner shopping plaza. It also has different residential districts associated with it. It has higher than the state average crash rate for people in all modes. It also has gaps in the facilities for people walking and biking, and it has a high proportion of senior and youth populations along the corridor. So if you have questions about any of those, Mark and Seth Asante and Yen Wang are here on the call as well, and they're happy to answer any questions about those studies or reach out to them separately. So bear with me, I'll just highlight what we're doing today and then we'll have the discussion topic. So today we're going to have 4 action items and there are 2 work scopes. So we'll ask you to vote on those Future of the Curve Phase 3 and an interesting MBTA work scope around mobility integrations. We'll also ask you to vote to endorse the First Amendment to the 22 to 26 tip and also vote to release public comment, the Second Amendment to that tip. And then we'll have a presentation on the Transportation Recovery Guidebook for Commercial Business Districts by Betsy Harvey. And that's work that was just recently completed this fiscal year. So as I promised, discussion topic, we committed to come back to you in January to talk about what we think is feasible for future meeting forums and venues. And a lot of this is around the kind of understanding that the act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, that act is set to expire on April 1st. It may expire, it may be extended, we don't know yet, but we wanted to be thinking ahead as to what we might do in either case. First, I just wanted to say that in the long run, what we've heard and what we intend to do is to plan for a hybrid format that would at a minimum allow for public participation. I think we've heard very consistently an appreciation for the ability of the public to be able to participate remotely in addition to in person. But in order to get to the point where we figured out how to handle the logistics of that kind of meeting, we're going to need more information about space, availability, and technology that we don't yet have. We may need to talk about additional money to invest in being able to do that. So that is still very much in the works, and we're thinking about that. But if after April 1st, there is an in-person quorum required, our short-term plan is to shift a few of the meeting dates to give us a little more breathing room and everybody a little bit more breathing room around that April 1st date so that we can transition to, at least in short term, the in-person quorum requirement. So there are a couple of dates that I'll just throw out there now and we'll communicate with you after. We would likely have a 3rd meeting in March anyway, due to the TIP development cycle, and that would be on March 31st. So we can already plan to add that 3rd meeting. And then instead of having the meeting on April 7th, we would shift out the April meetings each 1 week. So instead of April 7th and 21st, they'd be on April 14th and 29th. So again, that gives us a bit more of a buffer between if the act extending the measures expires on April 1st. We will need to know if we have access to the transportation boardroom by then. And so we'll be working to get that information. And if the extension does continue past April 1st, we will continue to hold these meetings virtually as we have been, is what we propose to you all, and continue to plan for the hybrid. So with that, I wanted to give it back to the chair, check in with you all as to whether you support this or have any additional input for us.
Thank you, Tegan. So does anyone have anything they'd like to discuss on this topic? As Tegan noted, we are hopeful that we won't just have to come back without having time to figure this out. But staff has done the necessary planning work, and as of right now, there is no extension. And come April, I believe it's April 1st, but sometime in April, we will be required to be meeting at least hybrid, which would mean some of us would be in person. So is there any discussion other than the general approval that staff is right and we should change our meeting dates? Questions, comments, anybody? Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm fine with the suggestion of changing meeting dates. And my suggestion with respect to hybrid, the technology is go as simple as possible initially. Beforehand, there were those of us who would have been happy just to have been able to call in. And so audio is what's most important in most cases, and to the extent the material that is presented can be made available beforehand so that a person can go along with what's being shown on their computer. I'm talking primarily, for staff people, and also for the public. Just go simple and try and make it work. And then as you get it working, then you can make it more complex. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Other comments or questions or concerns? Amira?
Yeah, so I just want to put in another opinion, also in support of what Leonard said. But in the past, Brian has also been in support of the hybrid option, being accessible to everyone and just honestly having the option to make it easier, quicker, and more accessible just for everyone, no matter where they are. So just in support and rephrasing what Brian said in before.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Seeing none, so taken, we should just go ahead and change the meeting dates, including adding the additional meeting in March, and then we will continue to prepare as if in April, we will have some type of hybrid meeting, which for our purposes will require, and taken, correct me if I'm wrong, if I say something that you don't agree with, in-person quorum. So as we get closer to April, if it looks like we're not getting an extension, staff will need to be sure that there's at least 11 of us, I think it's 11 is the quorum, who will commit to coming to an in-person meeting. So at some point, staff will need to make sure that there is a quorum ready to show up in person.
Mr. Chair, the only clarification I would add is that I want to make it clear that we don't yet have the confirmation of sort of the use of the room and technology that would let us make it hybrid as of April. So the worst case scenario is that there will be some level of fully in person. That's the worst case before we can shift to hybrid. To Len's point, we have to kind of start simple. We want to make sure that we're doing this smoothly and not violating any of the open meeting laws. But everything else you said is absolutely correct, in my opinion.
Okay. Now, next item, taking is that it for your report?
That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand and we will call on you. Seeing and hearing none, if you want to comment during the meeting, let us know and we will call on you then. Next up is committee chairs reports. Are there any? Seeing none. Regional Transportation Advisory Council report, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just took me a little while to unmute there. So we had a meeting back on the 12th, the highlight, as it is every year, was a visit from our previous chair, being the current executive director of the MPO, and that was Tegan, and she talked with us about the strategic plan for CTPS, past and present, and past and future, we also there were a lot of questions, of course, about what the additional funding would mean, particularly for the staff, because we are more interested in what additional funding would allow the staff to do, as opposed to what additional funding for planning for projects will allow us to spend. And Wig Zamore, a member of the MBTA Rider Oversight Committee, talked with us because we are in parallel to development of the LRTP, just exploring our own big ideas. And so he talked with us about wind energy and a modified urban ring. And it was a really nice presentation that he did. It wasn't very long at all. The presentation itself was probably about 15 minutes, and it's towards the end of the recording. And I suggest if you have a chance to check it out, because there's a lot of good information there. And finally, because I represent the Rider Oversight Committee on the Advisory Council, I just want to mention that we met with Ms. Murthy, being the new UTBRT manager. It's a really good meeting with her, and she has some really good insights to me about public transit. So it's really a joy having her there, and to make it clear to her and anyone else that you're always welcome to join any of our meetings. So that's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Any questions of Lynn from the members? Seeing and hearing none. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from November 18th and to December 2nd, and we'll take them one at a time. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of November 18th? And please state your name for the record, both the motion and second. No one wants to move the minutes? Darlene Nguyen.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Amira Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will move to approve minutes as well.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Heather Hamilton, do you have a question? You're raising your hand so when the vote comes. Vote comes. All right, Jonathan, call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano is joined the meeting now.
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell has joined the meeting now.
Sorry for the delay. Jillian Linnell votes yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee votes yes.
Allison Felix,
MAPC, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tintopolis,
Melissa Tintopolis, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries.
Jonathan, the representative from Framingham, the new representative from Framingham, also the old representative from Framingham, Dennis Giambetti, is actually here. He's identified his iPhone number 2. So if you could unmute him and call on him in the roll calls, Framingham can be recorded as voting.
Thank you. Dennis Giambetti.
You have somebody has to unmute Dennis. He's iPhone 2. Matt. There you go.
Dennis Giambetti abstains. I wasn't there.
Welcome back, Dennis. Next item on the agenda is the December 2nd meeting minutes. Can I get a motion in a second to approve? Tom Bent.
I'll make the motion to approve the those minutes.
Thank you. Tom O'Rourke.
I will second that.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Allison Felix,
Allison Felix, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bennett, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti abstains.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tintakis,
Melissa Tentopoulos, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable abstains.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is a work scope for the future of the curb, Phase 3, Blake Acting.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. My name is Blake Acton, and I'm going to spend the next few minutes introducing the future of the curb Phase 3 work scope, followed by a few minutes for questions and feedback. This is an MPO funded study with a $70,000 budget and is scheduled for completion by the end of the federal fiscal year. This study continues the previous Future of the Curb studies, which introduced the practice of curb management to the Boston region. The Phase 1 study provided local planners with references and examples of curb management throughout the United States. And in the recently completed Phase 2 study, we created a guidebook that provides planners with the foundation of curb management strategies and best practices. In this study, we will build on these previous efforts by developing methodologies for planners to evaluate the impact of these strategies in their respective communities. In pursuit of this objective, MPO staff will select examples in the Boston region where these strategies are actively in use or are scheduled for implementation early in the study period. Staff will then develop and perform a series of case studies to investigate their impact and whether they successfully meet the needs of local communities. Selection criteria for case studies will be determined by feasibility, data availability, and potential usefulness to local planners. Staff will select no more than 3 case studies and will seek to include cases that represent different land uses and community types throughout the Boston region. To maximize reproducibility, staff will prioritize projects with readily available data sources or that will require minimal field data collection. Upon completion of these case studies, staff will detail our results and methodologies in an online guide with summaries and guidance for data collection and analysis. And finally, the results will be presented to the MPO board. We are currently beginning the selection process to find examples to serve as our case studies. Please feel free to send me any ideas for which strategies, examples, or methodologies you would like to see in our study. Thank you for your time and attention. Paul, Krister, and I will gladly answer any questions.
Blake, any questions for Blake from the members? Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Blake. I mean, this is interesting as always. It's really good to see these studies, the plans fleshed out. I mean, there's no doubt that we were going to do this study when we were looking at the universe last year. And you mentioned on task 2, page 2 to from pages 2 to 3, that you're going to identify locations in the Boston region where curb management strategies are implemented to serve as case studies. More than one location may be identified for the same strategy, and more than one strategy may be evaluated, and so on. I really like the fact that there are going to be internal controls on this. So I think that's a really good element of the study. Any sense of how many locations you're going to go for?
So we're going to let that sort of naturally happen. I think we're going to let the I guess the feasibility and also the helpfulness of what we find sort of determine how many we do, because we might want to go more in depth on a lower number of case studies, or sort of more, breadth versus depth, right?
Right.
So I'm trying to keep it broad so that we don't limit ourselves if we find a great opportunity.
Great. Well, thank you. And I was a little thrown off because the last part where you said that you would ask us, or we're welcome to suggest strategies to explore, was kind of my first question was like, which strategies are you going to explore? And I guess that'll be collaborative effort on our part. So it's just going to make me do some more reading and encourage me to get back to you. So thank you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the members? Seeing none. Paul, do you have something you want to add? Nope. Okay.
No, I'm good, thanks.
Can I get a motion and a second to approve as presented today? Lynn Diggins.
Be happy to make the motion to approve this work study.
Thank you. Jay Monty.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll, Jonathan.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Allison Felix,
Allison Felix, abstain.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tintakis,
Melissa, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Donna. Next item on the agenda is the work scope for MBTA mobility integrations. Sandy Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I am here to present for your review the work program for project 13316, MBTA Mobility Integration Framework. The work program is posted to the meeting calendar and the link we'll put in the chat. CTPS will perform this task for the MBTA. The work is funded through MassDOT directed PL3C planning funds, federal funds provided to and directed by MassDOT primarily for the purpose of transit planning. While these funds are included in the federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP, this is essentially functioning as a contract work program, not MPO work. As always, we've accounted for the prioritization of MPO work before committing to this work. Paul Christner and I will be the co-project managers, and Rebecca Morgan is serving as the project principal. Lindsay Heffernan will be the client supervisor at the MBTA. The MBTA has asked CTPS to support their exploration of various ways to integrate their services with those of other mobility providers, such as by providing seamless experience in fares, technology, scheduling, and physical infrastructure. One example of such integration is the model known as Mobility as a Service, or MAAS. Other providers might include transportation network companies or TNCs, such as Uber and Lyft, bike share providers such as Blue Bikes, and other services yet to emerge. This project will support the MBTA with answering the policy question, or the why side of mobility integration. The MBTA wants to develop a policy that will guide its assessment of potential integrations in a way that's rigorous, honest, and supports the MBTA's own goals and objectives. We'll support the MBTA in establishing a framework for the future of mobility integrations and identifying what gaps such integrations can and cannot fill. There are 3 tasks in this work program, the first 2 of which will largely run concurrently. First, CTPS will develop a peer agency analysis, drawing on the experience of peer transit agencies that have integrated with mobility providers, such as by developing an MAAS policy. We'll identify 7 to 10 such transit agencies, both US and international, that have executed or are pursuing mobility integrations, create a matrix to assess the goals, methods, and metrics included in their plans, and write up a memorandum presenting case studies and comparisons. Second, we will engage regional and statewide stakeholders to pursue a gaps analysis and begin to develop the rationale for pursuing mobility integrations in the Commonwealth and the MBTA's role in those integrations. The goal will be to identify perceived gaps in transit and mobility and develop perspectives on how mobility integrations can help close them. This will involve interviews with MBTA staff to review MBTA goals, obstacles, and vision around mobility integration. We will also conduct interviews with a number of stakeholders involved in transportation policy and related fields in Massachusetts, and facilitate a workshop or open house through the MPO's Transit Working Group to gain input from other transit operators and regional stakeholders. We will then synthesize all of this information into a regional gaps analysis and needs assessment for future integrations. Finally, we will compare the products of the first two tasks to identify common elements and threads between worldwide practices and regionally expressed needs. To wrap up the work, we will create for the MBTA a detailed matrix and memorandum summarizing both peer best practices and feedback received on mobility integration policies, evaluating those elements against MBTA goals and recommendations for MBTA's mobility integration policy. The time period for this work is the remainder of the federal fiscal year, that is through the end of September, or 8 months. The budget is $138,384. I believe that Lindsay Heffernan, the client supervisor at the MBTA for this work, is here and would like to say a few words. After that, we'd be happy to take questions from members, and if and when you're satisfied, we ask for your vote to approve this work program.
Thank you, Sandy. Lindsay, you got some things you'd like to say?
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. I appreciate your having me here. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, David, for the time. I am really here just to endorse this work. It's a really important next step for us moving forward for the T to figure out in the space of the mobility as a service, what is the role for the MBTA? We're obviously a very large player, but not the only one. And how should we be partnering in the future with smaller, obviously micromobility is sort of the en vogue term, but how should we be partnering with some of those not so small partners? How should we be thinking about better regional connections and really want to explore, frankly, what a lot of our international partners are up to, what they're doing as such that the T staff can use all those inputs to develop our own internal policy to make important choices about what are the values we're trying to achieve here. Are we working to solve first and last mile problems? Are we working to solve mobility challenges for more vulnerable populations? Are we working to drive revenue for the T? All of these questions are not really determined, and this scope of work is going to help move us forward to be able to ultimately answer those questions. So I really just am here to say thank you, and we are excited about having this piece of work move forward.
Thank you, Lindsay. Questions from the MPO? Ken Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question. I know this is, I'm not exactly sure. The funding source you said is the combined, Sandy, the combined MPO funding contract? Is that what is the funding source of this? I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, I can take that, or you can explain it. Which would you prefer?
You can go, Sandy.
So this is a section of funding that's wrapped into the combined 3C and 5303 contract as it's now being awarded. It's what we used to call MassDOT 5303. It's now being called MassDOT Directed 3CPL. But basically it is a section of federal funding that is not directly controlled by the MPO, that it is, because it is wrapped into that contract, it goes into the UPWP and we account for it in the UPWP, but MassDOT gets to direct how this funding is used.
Okay, I wasn't, yeah, I figured it was basically 5303 funding. Okay, I did have another question about, I know this is in effect funded with federal funding that goes to the T and the MPO, but I saw no mention of the other two transit operators in the region, Metro West and CADA, and I was just wondering how that related to this one.
We're certainly going to be including, at the in working with the MBTA, thinking of developing the list of other providers to think about who the MBTA can partner with and integrate with, and looking at how the MBTA can integrate with those other RTAs in the region in various ways, may well be part of the work. And again, you know, the MBTA is the client and they will be directing the work. But that would be a strong possibility. But this work is on behalf of the MBTA. It is, you know, they're directing the work.
No, I understand about it. In addition to these other entities cooperating with the T as a transit provider, they could also be cooperating with Metro West Mankato as a provider, not solely looking at the, I wasn't actually looking solely at the cooperation of the T and Metro West Mankato.
Yeah, we'll definitely take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Lindsay, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, Mr. Miller, and not one that I would take lightly. The T's role to connect people to mobility should certainly involve our RTA partners, and so I more mentioned a couple of end users as in shorthand. Really, I think right now we're trying to ask really the value question. Why should we make integrations? What is the purpose? Who we ultimately might integrate with, micromobility or RTAs, I think is as a second order question. But I think what's the value proposition is what we're trying to get to here. But I would certainly welcome RTA participation as well.
Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I keep looking in the participants for Scarlett Frank, a member of the Wellesley Select Board, because I know she'd be very interested in this. I mean, I'm very interested in her comments on it, but she's not here, so I'll have to be on my own. So first question, will we get to see the memorandum? Because it wasn't specified at the end that it would be presented to us.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Len. We do not always present the memorandum for contract work to the board, but in this case, it would be at the MBTA's discretion. You know, the board can make that request, but it is something Lindsay and her team are going to decide.
Okay, so when would be the appropriate time for us to make the request?
From what, if I may, Mr. Chair, duly noted, I don't see any trade secrets here, right? We're going to sort of explore the scope of the universe, and I think coming back and saying, here are the things we have learned. I think the T will have some internal policy making to do thereafter, but this is really important inputs. So if I came back and told you, here's what Tokyo's doing, and here's what's happening in Milan, I think those are very reasonable things for us to share out in terms of what's next thereafter. I'm not sure yet. I think we got to learn what the field looks like. But be happy to come back at some point in time and talk about those findings.
Yeah, this is exciting. I mean, so it's the sort of thing I'm really excited to see the MBTA mascot doing. So I think I know what you mean by this, but I'm not sure. When you say that the project will support the MBTA with answering policy question or the Y side of mobility integration, I mean, if someone asked me to explain that, I don't think I'd be able to. So can you help me understand it, please?
Sandy, I'm guessing you want me to take a run at this instead. Where we have gone back and forth a few times on this, and so this is a little more slightly more atmospheric, and we're trying to bring it and ground it a little bit more. I think to me. I could envision that we get to a place on the T side. Again, this project is sort of the important inputs for the T to ultimately do some policy development that we certainly bring to our board and others to comment on and the like. But if we were approached by a, let me stick for a moment, if Mr. Miller will indulge me, with a micromobility partner, right? A small startup that's trying to provide scooters or bikes or ride sharing even, right? And is maybe targeting certain populations. And they may say, MBTA, we want to partner with you. How does the T decide who to partner with and why? And what are the end goals there? And if the space, as we imagine, could continue to become more full, when and how should the T be making those choices? And so that's sort of the value proposition to me that we're trying to get to say, again, maybe we end up with something that says we really want to partner in order to solve first and last mile challenges for otherwise MBTA users or for certain vulnerable populations. Again, or maybe revenue should be important to the T. Clearly, that's an important goal for us, for my team as well. So how do we kind of balance those? What should that universe look like? And what could we learn from other transit agencies that are a little bit farther ahead in this game than we are at this point in time? If that's helpful. Again, I think we have a lot to learn here in this space. And so this is going to be quite an exercise for us to kind of learn from others as we go.
Great, thanks. And in task 2, you mentioned that you will engage in regional and statewide. You will engage regional and statewide stakeholders to pursue a gap analysis. I think that's wonderful. But it kind of gets at some questions I've had since we've been really kind of diving into the regional transit agency issues of integration, and that is, and just me go to the chair. What entity on MassDOT or as a part of MassDOT looks at all the RTAs and the way they coordinate? Or, I mean, is there any entity that's at MassDOT that is kind of overseeing, coordinating with the RTAs?
Yeah, so Lynn, there are really two entities. There's the Rail and Transit Administration, and then there's the Office of Transportation Planning. So the Rail and Transit Administration oversees is probably the closest word. Oversees the RTAs, oversees the funding, works with the RTAs to do service planning. Okay, then periodically, as requested or assigned, the Office of Transportation Planning takes on work for the RTAs, including sometimes integration work.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I appreciate all the answers. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Sarah Lee.
Hi, everybody, and hi, Lindsay. Just curious if you envision this having any impact on existing transit connections, for example, MBTA connections to the airport or other places that are already ongoing. Thanks.
Yeah, if I can, David, absolutely. I think part of that gap assessment is sort of saying what's working now and what we would like that future to look like. So while I hope that we're taking a perspective that is saying 10 and 15 years, where do we want to be? We would certainly got to start with where we are in the present. And I think where there are certain gaps in potential mobility that we need to be looking at. So I would certainly put Massport in one of those regional transit partners that we would want to be talking with about what you all see as some things that are good about our current network or system and some gaps that we should be addressing.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any other questions? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to approve as presented today? And please state your name for the record. Lynn Diggins.
Lynn Diggins of the Advisory Council. Again, I am thrilled to make a motion to approve this work scope.
Thank you. Tom Bent.
And I will second that motion.
Thank you. Motion having made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Allison Felix,
Allison Felix, abstain.
Amira Patterson,
Amir Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tentakoulis,
Melissa Tentakoulis, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Sandy. Next item on the agenda is Amendment 1 to the FY 2022 to 2026 TIP. Matt Genova.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. For the first of two presentations today, I'll be discussing Amendment 1 to the federal fiscal years 2022 through 2026 Transportation Improvement Program. We first discussed Amendment 1 at the December 16th MPO meeting. As a reminder, Amendment 1 involves changes to both the highway and transit sections of the TIP, the full details of which are available in a handout posted to the MPO meeting calendar for your review. This is the first amendment to the current TIP, which was endorsed by this board on June 3rd of 2021, and which formally went into effect on October 1st of 2021. On the highway side of things, this amendment has proposed the addition of 3 line items to the statewide highway component of the TIP. And on the transit side of things, the MBTA is proposing program-wide adjustments to reflect current funding levels across programs and project readiness. So I'll start with the highway changes. MassDOT is proposing the addition of 2 new projects to the statewide highway program using funds from the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRRSA. These funds were just dispersed to states from Congress as part of the aid bill passed in December of 2020. The proposed projects to be added include the replacing of HOV barriers on the Southeast Expressway in Boston, Milton, and Quincy at a cost of $32,200,000. And the construction of an office and salt sheds, and the reconstruction of a park and ride lot along Route 9 in Framingham at a cost of roughly $3.5 million. In addition to those 2 projects, Amendment 1 proposes the programming of slightly less than $25 million in CRRSA funds to cover operating costs for the Metropolitan Highway System in the Boston region. As we discussed back in December, the allocation of CRRSA funds to cover MHS operating expenses allows existing MHS operating funds to be freed up to help cover the cost of a capital project here in the region. That project is the reconstruction of the Interstates 90 and 95 interchange in Newton and Weston. This reallocation allows the 90-95 interchange project to move forward using non-federal funding sources. Moving now to the transit portion of the proposed amendment, Amendment 1 also includes changes across the MBTA's federal capital program. As a standard practice in most years, this amendment proposes updates to the funding levels across the MBTA's programs in order to align those programs with the T's anticipated funding obligations. These obligations are based on a current assessment of project readiness. Most of the changes are proposed in federal fiscal year 2022, the first year of the active TIP, and the amendment includes the reprogramming of carryover funds that were unobligated in fiscal year 2021. Of particular interest to this board, many of the MBTA administered projects funded through the MPO's Community Connections Program have formally been added to the MBTA's capital program through Amendment 1. Those projects include carryover funds from the 2021 Transit Signal Priority projects in Cambridge and Somerville, and projects funded in 2022 through the Community Connections Program, including wayfinding in Alewife, Transit Signal Priority on Main Street in Everett, and new bike racks across a number of MBTA stations system-wide. Additional new projects include the MPO-funded second phase of the Columbus Avenue bus lanes and the Blue Hill Avenue corridor project, which was recently awarded a $15 million raise grant. Also flagged that not yet included in this amendment are any new funds that may become available as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law. As we've discussed at prior MPO meetings, more details on this new legislation will become available in the coming weeks and months, with programmatic changes likely following from there through future amendments. And as is customary, the MBTA will continue to evaluate program sizing for fiscal years 2023 and beyond as part of the forthcoming TIP development process that will kick off in earnest at our next MPO meeting in February. That's why this amendment really just focuses on adjustments to the T's 2022 program, as those are the projects that need to move forward in the current fiscal year. So per this board's vote on December 16th, Amendment 1 was released for a 21-day public review period. That public review period concluded on January 17th, and no public comments were submitted during this time. With that in mind, MPO staff requests that this board vote to endorse Amendment 1 as presented. And that's all I have on the amendment, so I'll turn it back over to the chair for questions and a vote.
Thank you, Matt. Question from the members? Seeing none, can we get a motion and a second to approve as presented today? And please state your name for the record. Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, I will make a motion to approve Amendment 1.
Thank you. Is there a second? Tom Bent.
I will second that motion.
Motion having been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Allison Felix,
Allison Felix, abstain.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
As I understand, Todd Terrain will be, oh, Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tintopolis,
Melissa Tintopolis, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is amendment number 2, Matt Genoa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For my second presentation today, I'll be discussing Amendment 2 to the federal fiscal years 2022 through 26 Transportation Improvement Program. Amendment 2 proposes the removal of one project from federal fiscal year 2022, from the federal fiscal year 2022 highway program. This project is a bridge deck replacement and superstructure repair project of Fellsway West over Interstate 93 and is currently funded with $3 million in statewide highway funds. This project was originally initiated by MassDOT Highway District 4 for the Bridge Systematic Maintenance Program. After further discussions between the district and MassDOT headquarters, it was decided that the deterioration of the structure warranted a more extensive scope of work than could be accommodated by the maintenance program. So for that reason, Amendment 2 proposes to remove the project from the current fiscal year of the active TIP. It's anticipated that the project will be rescoped in light of this new information and re-estimated before being proposed for programming in the next TIP, which again is the federal fiscal years 2023 through 27 TIP. And that is the TIP development process that, again, we will be kicking off in earnest in the coming weeks. Sorry about that. A little bit of lag here. So today, MPO staff requests that this board vote to release Amendment 2 for public review. That 21-day public comment period will begin in the coming days and will conclude in advance of the February 17th MPO meeting, at which time the amendment will be up for a final endorsement by this board. That's all I have on Amendment 2. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair for questions and a vote.
Thank you, Matt. Does anyone have any questions at this time on this amendment? Lynn Diggins.
So I somewhat jokingly asked me, is this a maneuver to get around our new policy of reevaluating projects that have a big increase in costs? So because I think if it had stayed there, then we would come under that review. But like I said, I'm just jokingly asking that. So of course I'm fine with this. I mean, and at the appropriate time, I'll be happy to make a motion to approve if for release.
I think it's the appropriate time. Lynn, you can make your motion.
Okay, I'm happy to make the motion to release this for public review, this amendment.
Is there a second? Tom Bent.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Tom. Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll, Jonathan.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Allison Felix,
Allison Felix, abstain.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
My understanding is Todd Corain has replaced Heather Hamilton for Brookline.
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Melissa Tintakulis,
Melissa Tintakos, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is the Transportation Recovery Guidebook for Commercial Business Districts. Betsy Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. I will be presenting today on the results of the study Access to Commercial Business Districts, Phase 2, for which we produced a guidebook called Transportation Recovery Guidebook for Commercial Business Districts. The goal of the study was to develop a pandemic recovery guidebook for municipalities regarding their transportation access to and in commercial business districts, or CBDs, in the Boston region. The guidebook is unique in that it takes a holistic view on the forces that will likely affect and are affecting CBD recovery. Rather than looking at transportation in a silo, it considers the role of other areas such as public health, climate change, housing, real estate, and the economy on recovery, since recovery cannot be achieved independent of those forces. So the intention is that the recommendations in the guidebook will not only help CBDs recover from the pandemic, which of course is critical, but to also help them build back in a way that will leave them more economically vibrant, sustainable, and equitable in the future. The guidebook is divided into two parts. There's the main content, and then there's the appendices. The guidebook itself focuses on the recommendations that we developed for municipalities, how we developed them, and the themes that we heard from interviews with municipal planners about transportation challenges and recovery in their CBDs over the past year and a half or so. The appendices contain additional information that provide more context for the recommendations in the guidebook. This includes details on the focus group that we held with local nonprofits and business groups, profiles of the municipalities that we included in our interviews, and a discussion of the driving forces that will affect pandemic recovery. And I'll kind of touch on those driving forces more in a moment and what those are. So I do encourage folks to read it all if you have time. It is quite lengthy, but if you don't, I recommend you at least take a look at section 3. That's chapter 3 of the guidebook. That's where the recommendations are. And that's kind of where all of our work is distilled. So to help us understand how COVID-19 has affected CBDs in the Boston region, as well as strategies and actions that folks have employed to support continued access to CBDs, and as transportation needs and patterns have evolved over the past 2 years, we put together case studies of 12 CBDs in 11 municipalities. So there are 2 within Boston. And to select CBDs, we started with the methodology that was developed as part of a recent MPO study, Transportation Access Studies of Central Business Districts. And one of the results of that study was a way to classify CBDs based on their level of public transit access. And so we picked CBDs within each type of transit access, ranging all the way from having rapid transit access down to having no public transit access at all. And so as you can see on the map, whoops, sorry about that. As you can see on the map, we also aim for geographic and sorry. Okay, I think you got that. As you can see on the map, we also aim for geographic and economic diversity, as well as a range of municipality sizes. We also sought out municipalities with significant EJ populations. As part of putting together the case studies, we did interview staff at those municipalities. And so by gaining an understanding of what was working and not working on the ground during recovery, we were able to help develop better recommendations that reflected the realities that municipalities are facing. So as we started to write this guidebook, a very unique challenge emerged. How do we write a guidebook for recovery in a pandemic that is continuously evolving, that is enmeshed in all areas of our lives, not just transportation, and for which there really is little precedence in the modern era? So even when the study scope was first approved, we didn't have a vaccine, and there were still limitations in the number of people that were allowed indoors at one time. Fast forward to the summer when we were working on this guidebook, over half of Massachusetts had been fully vaccinated and Fenway Park was once again full. And fast forward another 6 months and today we have one of the worst surges we've had so far with the arrival of the Omicron variant. So it was very clear to us that to be effective, the guidebook needed to adapt to whatever the future of the pandemic was going to be, as well as to reflect the varying challenges that municipalities face throughout the region. And it needed to reflect the uncertainty of the present moment. It is tempting perhaps to want to be reactive and fall back on what is easy and what is known, even when the Boston region faces challenges it has not yet before encountered. But the pandemic has made clear that this is not an option, not if the region is to achieve the vision that the MPO set forth in its long-range plan, which, to summarize, seeks to invest in transportation that supports an equitable, sustainable, healthy, and economically vibrant region. And so in recognition of this new reality and a desire to respond proactively to it and help municipalities do the same, we turned to a process called exploratory scenario planning, or XSP. You may remember that Michelle Scott, my colleague here at the MPO, gave a presentation last month on the Big Idea study where she also used XSP. The XSP framework is specifically designed to support decision-making where there's a significant amount of uncertainty and where there are multiple interconnected forces at play, both of which are the case in COVID. So FHWA defines exploratory scenario planning as scenarios designed around uncertain futures to help identify potential what-ifs that can be assessed and considered relative to how they might positively or negatively impact community and transportation goals. From these insights, participants can identify a set of resiliency strategies or key actions that are beneficial regardless of which future scenario comes to be. So it's those key strategies and actions that are the recommendations in Chapter 3 of the guidebook. And what is critical here in regards to those recommendations is that last sentence. Developing strategies and actions that build resiliency and allow communities to thrive even when things are uncertain and the future may bring significant challenges. We used a modified version of XSP to develop these recommendations with the goal of providing planners and decision makers with actionable investments. Some versions of XSP do use modeling tools, which you may be thinking about in reference to Michelle's presentation of the Big Idea study the other month. But others, including this one, take a qualitative approach based on input from interviews, a focus group, and research that we conducted as part of our literature review. The flowchart on the screen shows each of these 6 steps that we went through. So I'm going to spend a few minutes walking through that process at a pretty high level to help you to understand how this process allowed us to develop our recommendations. So the core of XSP is to identify driving forces, whether technological or societal, environmental, political, or economic, that will affect the question that you're trying to answer. And so for this study, what we were trying to answer, our focal question was, how can CBDs in the Boston region build resilient transportation infrastructure and processes that allow them to recover from COVID-19 and its impacts on transportation access to and within CBDs? So with that focal question defined, we could come up with forces that we think would affect a pandemic recovery. As the image on the right-hand side of the screen shows, we rank those based on their level of importance on the x-axis and their level of uncertainty on the y-axis. So note that the driving forces are those that fundamentally people or group of people have control over. So they are root forces and distinct from outcomes. For example, it might be tempting to consider mode share as a driving force, but that's actually an outcome of personal preference among other driving forces. As you can see on the graphic, several driving forces do relate to personal preferences, such as shopping preferences, or to a decision a person or a group makes, such as MBTA priorities. It can also be a force largely external to human control, such as climate change. So after coming up with those forces, we pulled out those that are on the right-hand side of the matrix, those that are both important to the focal question and those that are either certain or uncertain. Those that are uncertain. These are the ones that we've really focused on in this process. And I should note here that all of the driving forces are relevant in some way to the focal question, but just that in the process of XSP, you really want to kind of focus in on the ones that will have the biggest impact and the most relevancy to the questions that you're exploring. So the next step was to identify the critical certainties and uncertainties that are most important to the focal question that we're answering. Certain critical certainties are those that are already occurring or will happen. They're common to whatever future we end up kind of having in the region. While critical uncertainties are those that would lead to divergent futures depending on their direction and magnitude. And that's what you focus on when we're thinking about developing the scenarios in this process. So some of the driving forces that we included are in the left-hand or second from left column, things like vaccination rates, the duration and severity of COVID-19, travel preferences, MBTA service priorities, employer teleworking policies, consumer shopping preferences, business models, economic inequalities, e-commerce, residential preferences, employer demand for office space. And so, for example, just call out the transportation category. We see that people's preferences for different modes might be shifting, so that's a critical uncertainty, but we also know that the MBTA service priorities around commuter rail and bus service has changed to focus more on transit critical populations, so that's one of our certainties in that category. So next we develop scenario matrices and narratives, and those scenarios are distinct features that are created using our critical uncertainties that we felt were most relevant to the focal question. You may have noticed that some of the driving forces are interrelated, but it is important to select those that are independent of each other. And so we chose two that are most relevant to the study. The first one was consumer shopping preferences, and the second is employer teleworking policies. And so we kind of developed a yes/no question to help us define what kind of what the future could look like for each of those driving forces. One is, will businesses and CBDs prosper and successfully adapt to changes brought by the pandemic? And will working from home, either hybrid or full-time, become the norm for those who can? At each end of the axis, the yes and the no parts are kind of represent an extreme. And the point isn't here to predict what's going to happen, but to explore what could happen in order to help prepare for those possibilities. So we then want to cross each of these two axes. So we get 4 plausible, relevant, and divergent scenarios, one in each quadrant. I'm not going to go into detail into each one of them. You can read about them in the guidebook. But what I will say is that help us to think about how different uncertainties could play out in different ways, ultimately helping us to come up with actions and strategies that municipalities could take to proactively prevent negative outcomes that may result from each scenario, as well as support positive outcomes that may result from each scenario. So we then move on to identify the implications of those scenarios and then developing recommendations. So the key characteristics of these recommendations is that they are low or no threat solutions that could address the threats and support desirable opportunities that are present in most or all of the 4 scenarios. Threats could include possible long-term decreases in commuter rail ridership, while opportunities could include supporting the recent increase in walking and bicycling. The table, which is only a portion of the full table that's in the guidebook, lists the strategies and actions that we came up with and shows how they relate to the driving forces that we identified at the beginning of the XSP process. The gray circle means that the recommendation would likely provide negligible support for adapting to the driving force, while the green triangle means that the recommendation could support adaptation to or shape the direction of the driving force. This helps give readers a sense of which recommendations could address which driving forces and therefore which might be most appropriate for their situation. So the remainder of the guidebook then in chapter 3 describes these recommendations in detail. For example, establishing municipal processes for outdoor dining programs. We also provide examples from the case studies, as well as an estimated implementation timeframe. And I'll say that the case studies in more detail, you can see their examples in the appendices, and it talks more in detail about each of those case studies. And then we also provide links to resources for funding and just general information about that particular recommendation from external resources. So some of the recommendations are systematic in that they are process strategies such as public engagement, while others are programmatic or infrastructural. Many were developed based on what we heard from focus group participants and in our interviews with the case study of municipalities. Some were things that municipalities are already doing in response to the pandemic, such as working across department boundaries, while other things are recommendations that interviewees thought would be helpful, such as establishing outdoor dining programs in a permanent way. So to wrap things up, I want to emphasize that many of these investments are things that people are doing already in their municipalities and as well as at the MPO, such as investing in bicycle and pedestrian improvements and incorporating resiliency into projects. But probably one of the most important takeaways from this study is not simply that we do invest in these types of projects, but that the way in which we do so is going to dramatically impact the effectiveness of these investments to reach our goals and recover from the pandemic. Implementation can be faster, it can be flexible, public outreach can be inclusive, investments can prioritize systematically excluded communities, and silos between transportation and public health and housing, among others, can be taken down, but only if decision makers proactively take those steps to do so. As we've seen in the pandemic, a lot of those things have begun to happen and very successfully allowing CBDs to help them thrive during this and survive during the pandemic. And in doing so, municipalities will not only survive, but will have a blueprint for success for the coming years and decades. For if there's one thing that's been made clear over the past few years is that uncertainty is one of the few things that we can rely on for sure, and that the Boston region should be prepared to deal with them, whatever the future brings. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions about this study. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Questions from the members? Lynn Diggins.
First, I want to say this is really great report. I haven't read it all, but I am going to, and it's certainly going to ask you to come and talk to the advisory council about this. And so those are my questions I will save for then. But a general question is, and I think I've asked something like this before, and maybe this might be appropriate for someone from APC to chime in on at some point, is how do we get this in front of more people? Because Dan Amsteps isn't here, but he's got this already. I can work with him to get this before the powers that be in Arlington. But I think this is sort of thing that should be in front of almost every select board and in front of everyone on the joint transportation committee in the legislature. Because I think to the extent people know this and understand it, it would really affect the way that they program or allot money towards transportation and transit. So I just put that out there, but certainly want to follow through on that question and have you come and talk with us. But really, this is a great guide. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I'll just say real quick, we are planning on doing at least, to our sub-regions and doing some presentations there. So, but yes, thank you. I appreciate the kind words and we're happy to come to RTAC.
Any other questions or comments? Tom Bent.
Hi, Betsy, and yeah, thank you very much for this. Haven't read through it all, but it looks like it's very comprehensive. And then kind of just following up on Lynn's comments, I think, I know especially here in Somerville, we have, squares, which are, central business districts. So they'll be very interested to see what the recommendations are here. But like Glenn said, I think what's important is not only to, the powers to be that get up to speed on this, but also getting that information out to these central business districts so that they see what, what those recommendations are and, have an opportunity to comment. And would that be something if, I think with our Chamber of Commerce here, they would be very interested in hosting like a webinar from you or something to kind of go over maybe some of the details of this. Is that something that the type of outreach that you'd also do?
Absolutely. And just generally, if anyone would like to have a more detailed discussion about this or high level discussion, just let me know. Throw out there my email in the chat, but I'm happy to talk more detail with anybody who'd like that.
All right, great. Thank you, Betsy.
Of course.
Any other questions or comments at this time? Seeing none. Great job as always, Betsy. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is member items. Are there any items to come before the MPO at this time? Ken Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let everybody know, if you don't already, that last Friday, Federal Highway released an apportionment notice for what's a new program that's part of the Infrastructure and Investment in Jobs Act, or the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is the Bridge Formula Program. This is funding that is made available to repair and rehabilitate bridges around the country. It's $5.5 billion over the next 5 years, but it does include 2022. This program starts this year. Just want to point out that Massachusetts is receiving just about $225 million per year, starting in this year and going for 5 years to repair bridges, of which 15% is required to, at a minimum, is required to be spent on off-system bridges. That is, those bridges that are not on the federal aid highway system, but are eligible for federal funding. So I imagine at some point down the road, the state and the MPOs will be talking about this funding, and then the increased how the increased funding affects not only future years, but also 2022. I should point out that this money comes with its, in effect, it's an allocated program. It comes with its own obligational authority in effect, so it is not competing with our normal federal funding apportionment categories for obligational authority. And so I guess I would say stay tuned. We have transmitted this notice obviously to the state and to the MPOs, I don't know if Tegan or other folks on the MPO will be interested in the notice and guidance regarding this program, but it is available. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You said it's available, but it's a general fund transfer and there's no appropriations bill. Can we actually start spending this money today?
No.
What? I didn't hear you.
I don't believe so. We've gotten the codes, you know, the program codes for our system. I'm not sure if the money is actually in the system yet. I would have to check on that.
Could you check on that, King? Because available means something different in the English language than it's available, but you can't actually use it. So can you check?
Right. Yes, I can check. It will be. I'm pretty sure it. You never know, but it will be available before the end of the year.
Well, assuming there's an appropriations bill that passes and not another continuing resolution that just uses fast act money, because we all thought it'd be available by now since it got passed, you know, a month ago or more.
Right. So you'll find out in mid-February.
All right. Thanks, Ken.
But I will check. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis Giambetti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say it's nice to be back in the MPO. I see some very familiar faces and some not so familiar, but I look forward to working with each of the members over the coming weeks and months.
Thanks, Dennis. Welcome back. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I should have said this during the executive chair's report. And that, because I thought we were going to discuss the memos, and I just didn't pay close attention to the agenda. But I just wanted to express my appreciation for all of the information that is in those memos for the corridor studies, the tables at the end that reveal the scores. Were very helpful and informative. And so they were a good read. And so it makes me more confident in the selection of those projects, and for those corridors. And so thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other member items come before the board at this time? Seeing and hearing none, can I get a motion to adjourn? And please state your name for the record when making a motion. Lynn Diggins.
Motion to adjourn.
Tom Bent.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Without objection, we are adjourned. See everybody at the next meeting. Have a great month, guys, or couple of weeks.